Hey, we're here and we're back on the Marketer of the Day podcast with Mr. Eric Holtzclaw, who is the Chief Strategist and Dojo Master at LigerPartners.com. He's an author, he's a podcaster, he's a visionary and an idea guy, serial entrepreneur, 30 years of experience, who has a knack for founding companies, sometimes unintentionally. And some of Eric's startups include one of the first profitable internet enterprises and a company that appeared on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing list 3 years in a row. So we're going to be talking about some of these important fundamental things we need to know, like our core values, crafting our visions, finding our identities, establishing our brands, all that kind of marketing stuff that maybe you've heard, but maybe need to implement or re-implement, revisit, enhance, refine, whatever. So Eric, glad to be talking to you.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you too. Appreciate you coming on and taking the time. And so we introduced you, hyped you up a little bit, but in your own words, what the heck are you up to? What's your current passion and focus?
So I am a recovering technologist. So back in the day, I used to run development and, kind of engineering shops and then owned a research company for a period of time. And now I run a marketing firm. And the reason that's an interesting background is marketing is a combination of technology and understanding your user. So it's a good time to think about those two things. So if you've got that in your background, then you're very well skilled to be in that space. So yes.
And that's an interesting observation because for my whole life, I've tried to figure out like why am I drawn to certain like types of work? Like I'm a programmer, I like to, like write code and solve problems, but then there's that aspect of like communicating and persuading and writing something that like makes someone change their mind or deliver information and it's just long enough and just short enough. So that's kind of an interesting observation that it's where the technology and the people come together and you're always looking to capture that magic, right? For some reason, like Apple seems to be the stereotype for that. Like when they invented the Macintosh, it was no longer like a geek device. It was this gateway into like writing and art and music and all these cool and fun things. And so when we think about the magic of marketing, it's sometimes hard to get our head around it, right? Because it can be like academic, and I feel like sometimes I have to like go like really tight and then really broad and like look at what people have done just to rise above the buzzword speak. And so like what are your thoughts on all this sort of stuff? Like when someone says, well, my figuring out my mission and my brand and my values, like I know that's important, but it's sometimes tough to rise above the boringness, blandness of it all. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so the reason the company is called Liger is we're a combination of strategy and execution. So a lion and a tiger combined is where the name comes from. It also comes from the movie Napoleon Dynamite because it was his favorite animal. And the reason that that combination is important is the place that companies struggle with all the time is they get into execution too quickly. So, oh, I need to put something out on a social media channel or write a newsletter or all of those types of things. And they haven't established where they're headed from a marketing perspective in the strategy side of the world. And if they spend enough time, it doesn't have to be a lot of time in that space, you're going to look at your competitors. You're going to understand how you can stand out from other people, and you're going to set what we consider as some North Star things. Like this is what we say, this is how we look, this is how we work, this is our mission in the world, these are the values we believe in. And then the marketing comes out of that more naturally. So you can't fake marketing, right? Like when you see a company that's markets one way and then you start to experience the brand, you know that they're just selling you on something, right? So we want to have authenticity in that. And so establishing the strategy then allows you to put the execution on the back end of it. It is very complicated. Marketing is one of the more complicated practice areas, and that wasn't true so much about 20 years ago. But there are 25 to 30 different skill sets underneath the Liger firm's sort of area of specialty and expertise. And we have to have all of them in concert in order to make marketing work correctly. So like when do you apply one thing versus the other? How do we pull back? Now we have the introduction of AI, and it's going to have a dramatic impact on what marketing is and what marketing does. So being in that space of naturally curious and, as you said, standing out above the crowd, because if you're going to do marketing, you should stand out. It shouldn't be boring. So our mission statement is saving the world from boring, broken marketing. And most marketing is either boring or broken or both.
Very interesting. And I like this kind of measure twice, cut once idea where it's tempting to just like, bang out the sales letter, start the social media post, figure out the SEO. And you're saying, well, spend some time to look at what trail has been blazed already before you, see what the competitors are doing. That way you can get like a little bit angry about like, oh, I can do way better, but also that you don't fall into kind of the obvious cliche, lazy messaging that maybe they have already traversed, and then you can instead kind of look at what's already been done and do it better or do it in a different way. And so you say that it doesn't take that much time in order to do this kind of initial research. And so it's not like some huge, like months long commitment, but what do you think is the amount of this sort of research to do? Is this the kind of thing where should some companies like look at like 200 competitors, spend like 2 weeks on it? Like, what's the time commitment for this initial, like getting the lay of the land?
Well, it is funny that you said months long because it is about a month. So you spend about a month kind of going through the discovery process, looking at key competitors. There's a lot of tools out there now that help you circumvent or like speed up that process of what are other people doing, where could we fit. But it is as much about being introspective. So what is our company? What does our company stand for? What are the values that we present to the world? Why do people buy from us? And it's never price and it's never features. There's something that you do for that customer that makes them feel good, makes them successful. So getting down to those really key drivers that tell you, why does someone work with us? And then making sure that gets amplified within your marketing message in a way that it stands out. If you were just following what everyone else is doing, there's this like, oh, we want to follow best practices. No one should be following best practices in marketing because that just means you're doing all the boring stuff. So there's some things you have to do to make sure you show up in certain places, but you really do need to. Marketing is all about, again, visceral reaction. Make me cry, make me laugh, make me happy, make me sad. Do something that makes me pay attention. The average human's attention span is 7 seconds. Goldfish is 8. So our attention span is 1 second less than a goldfish. And so you've got all these messages coming to people. You got to do something that makes them care about your brand and care about your brand in a place other than your website or your store, or when you meet them, they need to find you in all the other parts of the ecosystem that they are participating in, not necessarily where you're exerting your energy.
Wonderful. And that whole insight about the low attention span, that's okay. That's the world we live in, right? And you hear these numbers about how like there's like tens of thousands of ads delivered to every person every day just from them being out in the world. And so we can't change it. We might as well figure out a way to live in it. And so I like what you said there about kind of observing, identifying what gets people excited and paying attention to you and your company, and then amplifying it. So that way you're not really like inventing something new or like grasping at straws. You're saying, well, let me look at the data and then let me figure out like what I've done maybe by accident or like subconsciously, intuitively, and then amplify more of what goes on there. And you also mentioned how there's kind of these sort of different sub skills, right? That marketing these days is very involved, complicated. And so what comes to mind are things like copywriting or storytelling or SEO, but that's just a guess. So when you say like all these other ingredients go into marketing, like what are some of these sub skills?
Yeah, you touched on one that was a very long conversation within our firm, the difference between copy and content. So those are both words, but they're different types of writers who write those words. And so depending upon what you're doing, you either need someone who understands copy, typically short, punchy, grabs your attention, those types of things, or content, more long form blogs, articles, newsletters, things like that. So understanding that the problem in marketing is that everyone thinks they can do it. It looks simple. It's like, oh, it's some words and some graphics, and I could do that. Now, you said you're a programmer. Not everyone thinks they can program. Like they just don't believe that. And not everybody believes they're an accountant. And not everybody believes like they can do other parts of the company. So there's this assumption that it's a lot simpler than it is. But it's very difficult to craft everything together, make sure there's a good ensemble of those things. You're hitting those customers enough time so that they're paying attention to who you are, and then moving them successfully over into your sales team. So it does require this very strategic thought, but the problem with that strategic thought is it changes. So like you get the introduction of the new technology, like there's a new trend, whatever. So you've built this 90-day plan, and then within that 90-day plan, you have to be ready to like make those adjustments. So having the right skill sets within your organization who can look at all the right things and then make a suggestion back and say, yeah, no, we said to start doing that, but somebody, Google just changed the rules. Now we have to go this way, so that you want to go to the same destination, but you need to be a little bit flexible with how you might get there. So what that does in small companies, because I know you talk a lot with entrepreneurs, is they tend to then be inconsistent. And consistency is really important, but it's consistency within the right channels of information. So making sure your brand is always showing up the same way, same messaging, same look. Because when you switch it out, basically you make the human brain reset the number of times they've seen it. And so thinking about this over the continuum of the customer journey, and most of the companies we work with are a complex sales process. So it takes like 6 to 8 months for the sale to happen. That does require that you're very consistent in that period versus transactional, where you give somebody a discount, or you incent them some way to like tip over. Those can be easier from a marketing perspective.
And many tools in the toolbox, right? And it's great to hear about the kind of art and science of it, where the art is like, well, let me observe and kind of adjust and be flexible, but there's also this kind of scientific aspect you're mentioning here of like them get all the follow-ups and the touch points, and if you change something, then it resets. And so for me, that kind of makes it really clear that we need to have training, we need to have skills, and it's easy enough to say like, oh, I can write some stuff. I wrote a high school essay once, and you're saying, well, yeah, but there's like certain like elements of your writing that need to be in place. It's not just like writing a free form high school essay. There's things where if you don't say, well, I want this blog post to kind of bucket brigade them until the end and get them to join the newsletter, or I want this landing page to them like sign up and like book a coaching call or pay money or something. If I don't know what my goal is and I'm just meandering around, then that's no good at all. And so you mentioned about, or we both mentioned a little bit about like talking with entrepreneurs. And I believe that you've spoken to over 1,000 entrepreneurs and you've come across their top 10 lessons. So I got to know what some of these are. And I feel like I think your episode like 1,092. So I feel like I'm a kind of a similar wavelength. I feel like maybe 60% of the lessons, the insights from guests like you, I feel like I've heard a lot of them before, and there's like that mix of the old and the new. But what have you come across? What do you think are these really important lessons from speaking with all these entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I started talking to entrepreneurs about 14 years ago. I started podcasting about 14 years ago, and I did it because I was told by a marketing firm I needed to start standing on stages. And I was like, I don't stand on stages. So I did the podcast because it was an easy way for me to have conversations with people and start to practice the ability to stand in front of them and deliver my message. So during that process, I thought, well, I want to interview entrepreneurs. And I was on the radio for 2 years and talked to entrepreneurs about, why they started their businesses and what it looked like. And I expected them to tell me things like, oh, they didn't have enough money, or they didn't get support from their family, or they whatever. And what I learned is that entrepreneurs typically fall into two different categories. So there is a rectify entrepreneur. So there's the entrepreneur who started a business and started to do something to prove someone else wrong. So someone told them that they weren't good enough, they would never succeed. They have some kind of like angst in their background that they want to prove differently. And then you have those that are magnify. And magnifies were told that they were special and that they were good at what they do. And they went through the world sort of thinking that. So they build big businesses on that side. About 70 to 80% of entrepreneurs are rectify. So they are building a business to prove someone else that they are better than they were told they were. And about 20% of them are magnifies. If you had a really great childhood and no real, things you had to overcome, you probably should just go get a job, because it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be an entrepreneur. So entrepreneurship does require some kind of a grit, some kind of power source. And so then commonly, you talk about 10 mistakes, like, there's always the dating at the beginning of a company, and you never think about the end, and every company has an end. So how do you know what that exit is going to look like? So there's just these things that you almost watch every entrepreneur follow. And having been an entrepreneur before, it was cool. Like when I started, it just meant I people thought I was unemployed. It's become this like rock star status, and it is a tough job. You should not get into it unless you have the grit to get through it and to know that it's always going to be this roller coaster. So one minute you're way up and you're like, this is amazing. And then the next minute you're like, oh my gosh, why the heck am I doing this? It's far better to just be a greeter at the local, at a local retail store or something. So I have a heart for entrepreneurs. It's always, I sort of have it in my blood and can't help it. But at the same time, it's not for the weak. That is not something that you should just go off and do.
I agree completely. It is a crazy adventure. And so you mentioned how there's the rectifiers and the amplifiers. Is one better than the other, or is there a proper way, or are they just two strategies of going about it?
Well, it's not even a strategy. It has to do with a little bit of like nature nurture. So like your background, that kind of thing. There is potentially one that is better. So a magnify is better. Magnifiers build bigger businesses than rectifies do. Rectifies are building businesses for potentially someone else or to prove something else in a way. And that you're coming from more of a negative energy category, right? And if they realize it, it can be destructive to their business. So if they find out, oh my gosh, like the reason I do this and the way that I do it, it's to because my, a seventh grade guidance counselor told me I'd never account it for anything, right? Those people, when they realize that's what they're doing, that can be very damaging. Magnifies can build huge businesses. And I'm going to give you an example of a really good magnifier because you brought them up earlier. So Steve Jobs is a magnify. Now, Steve Jobs was adopted. So he was adopted and he came home. If you read his biography, he came home and he told his parents, he was in second or third grade, something like that. He came home and he said, Mom and Dad, I was adopted. And his parents could have said, yeah, Steve, you're right. Da, 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 and that might have taken him down the rectify path. But what they did is they said, yes, Steve, we chose you. We chose you to be our child. And so Steve Jobs lived the rest of his life as the chosen one. Like he did everything that he wanted to. He was an entrepreneur, amazing entrepreneur, and he built an amazing business. And so when you see the stories of people who kind of come from this place of some adversity with a positive spin to it, they build big businesses. Like they just see the world as their oyster. Rectifies do it sometimes to like as rule breakers, and you put me in this box and it's not true. And those people may have some demons that are still chasing them.
Okay, well, that is an interesting insight that we'll have to think about for a long time and be like have that awareness. And there's always the comparison game being played. If you're like reading this, like say you're reading that biography of Steve Jobs, you look at it and say, okay, well, what am I doing differently, or what am I doing that's kind of on a similar path, and how can I kind of figure out like how to like pursue the greatness in somewhat of the proven way. And so if we have this insight already of saying, well, am I a rectifier and a magnifier? What motivates me? Why am I doing this? What is it leading to? And I think that can really help get the context in just especially when things get tough, right? Especially when we're on that gritty roller coaster and we need to figure out like what's this leading for, or how can I find the discipline and motivation. It can help to have this sort of insight that you're mentioning here of the rectifier or the magnifier. And so in our last few minutes of our conversation, I mean, you're a podcaster, Eric. You know that stories are fun, and you've already mentioned a few of those stories, but since this episode is all about you and your failures and achievements, do you have a fun entrepreneurial roller coaster type story to share with us, just about proving or showing about your skill and what it is you do?
I would say my entire career is that. Like I started my career at IBM, and because I wanted to be when I was 5 years old, I just wanted to be president of the United States or work for IBM because I'm from Atlanta and IBM was like the thing. And so I ended up at IBM and realized 2 years in, I was like, wow, this is really boring. This is not what I want to do at all. And so I went to work for my first startup, which was a bunch of ex-IBMers who had been let go. It was IBM was doing downsizing. They didn't know how to do it. So they paid people way too much money. So they started a bunch of businesses. So I was working with a bunch of ex-IBMers. And so, I mean, my entire career is like these ups and downs. I'm probably in my fifth career for my business or of my life because of ways things have changed and what I've done. I have all of us have so many, losing that client or hiring that bad hire and, finding out that there's they don't have the background that you expected. There's just, I don't know that I could pinpoint a story. I know that's a bad answer, but it's like I'm so grateful in what I've been able to do because I've traveled amazingly. I've been all over the world, and I was in Saudi Arabia just before 9/11 for a couple weeks, selling banking services to their bank, like all kinds of crazy stories. So I wouldn't exchange it, but it isn't consistent. And the business we're in now, one of the things in my bio was it was an accidental business. I sold my last business in 2012 and swore I would never start another one. And then I accidentally started a business in 2018. And I think that is an entrepreneurial set, is that you like can't help yourself. All of a sudden there's like, oh wait, I've created this thing and it's bigger than me. Now I need to hire people and figure out how to fund it. So I feel very proud of any entrepreneur who's made it through the past 5 years. 2019 to 2023 in particular were very tough years for any small business to succeed through the pandemic and, some of the um, stuff that has happened in the space. So just pat yourself on the back for surviving.
Okay. And so much change has happened and so much more change to come. And it's kind of inspiring and fun just to hear about the different phases, the different careers that you've been through, because there's the choice of playing it safe and of not taking action, or there's the choice of letting you life kind of push you here and there, but there's that kind of entrepreneurialism of building a beast, right? The accidental business. You found this problem, you found the solution. Now you create more problems. Now you need people to help you do it, and now you need to find the clients and make the operations and the business work. It can be fun and exciting, and we want to kind of tap into that, right? And I know that you have your book and your company and your podcast and so many other things. So if someone says, man, this guy Eric, he gave me so much inspiration, he gave me like a handful of ideas, and I want to take the next step and communicate with him and his company, how does somebody know if their business is a right fit for yours? And if they are, what's the next step with you? How do they reach out? What's the call to action?
Well, for me in particular, I love talking with other entrepreneurs. So you can find me on LinkedIn. So if you want to have a chat, I love business. It's the game, it's my hobby, it's what I do. So that's great. If you are a B2B firm looking for marketing, Liger typically focuses on business to business or relational marketing, so long-term sales cycles. So would love to, you can find our information at ligerpartners.com.
Wonderful. Ligerpartners.com if you're a B2B company, and that is Liger partners.com. Liger, like from Napoleon Dynamite, and then Eric Holtzclaw on LinkedIn. That last name is Holtzclaw, Chief Strategist and Dojo Master at Liger. So as we're wrapping up our conversation here, Eric, once again, inside baseball with podcasting. It's fun to end on a bang instead of a whimper. It's great to get a final lesson or quote from our guest just to know about some kind of insight or aha or something soundbitey so we can make the reels, but also it's a great ending. That's copywriting as well, right? That like it's great instead of just saying, oh, hey, we're done, bye-bye. We end with something impactful and powerful. Just so what comes to mind for you as far as a fun quote or lesson along those lines to send us on our way?
The secret to life, so I'm sorry, the secret to success in life and business is consistency.
I love it. Very concise and powerful. So let's be consistent, have consistency on the mind as we go to ligerpartners.com and add Eric Holtzclaw on LinkedIn. Wonderful speaking with you, Mr. Eric.
So much. Thank you for the invite. I appreciate it.